The dog wouldn't stop barking. Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the dense forest. The scruffy golden mutt darted ahead, pausing every few steps to glance back, its eyes glowing in the dark. "I swear," Ethan muttered, "if this dog leads us to another dead end, I'm going to lose my mind." It had started an hour ago, just past the old diner. The dog had appeared out of nowhere, barking like the world was ending. Ethan and Noah had ignored it at first. Strays were common, and barking dogs usually meant nothing. But this one was different. It didn't just bark. It pleaded. Now, deep in the woods, the dog froze. Its ears perked, and the barking stopped. The forest fell silent. Ethan's stomach tightened as the mutt let out a low whine, its body tense. It took a few hesitant steps forward, then sat at the base of a gnarled oak tree, tail curled around its legs. Ethan swung his flashlight toward the tree, the beam cutting through the shadows. His breath caught. Something was there, half buried under leaves and dirt, a bundle of fabric, a child-sized jacket. "Over here?" Ethan called, his voice cracking. The others rushed to his side. Sheriff Bennett crouched down first, his trained eyes scanning the scene. Ethan dropped to his knees, clearing the leaves. The fabric was damp, dirty, but unmistakable. It was a kid's coat. Then a sound, faint, almost imperceptible, a whimper, a sniffle, and then a tiny broken voice. "Help!" Ethan's flashlight trembled as he turned it toward the sound. Just beyond the roots of the tree, barely visible in the dim glow, was a small figure curled up in the dirt. A little girl, no older than 6 or 7. Her blonde hair was tangled, her face smudged with dirt and tears. Her eyes, frightened and glassy, locked onto Ethan's, and then fluttered shut. She was alive. The dog, the scruffy golden mutt that had led them here, stepped forward and lay down beside the girl, pressing its warm body against hers. It was as if it had been guarding her this whole time, refusing to leave her even now. Ethan swallowed hard, his heart pounding. This dog had saved her. "Let's get her out of here," Bennett said, his voice sharp with urgency. The team sprang into action. Chris radioed for backup, while Noah wrapped his jacket around the girl. Ethan scooped her up gently, cradling her against his chest. She barely stirred, her tiny hands gripping the fabric of his coat. Ethan looked down at the dog, its brown eyes meeting his. He reached out, running a hand over its scruffy fur. "You knew," he murmured. "You brought us here?" The dog let out a soft huff and licked the girl's hand, as if reassuring her she was safe. Ethan turned toward the others, his mind racing. Who was this little girl? How had she ended up alone in the woods? And how long had this dog been watching over her? They had found her, but the real question remained, what or who had put her out here in the first place? The team hurried back through the forest, the girl safe in Ethan's arms. The dog trotted faithfully at their side, never once looking back. Ethan's grip tightened as they pushed through the trees, the dim light of the town street lamps finally breaking through the darkness ahead. Every second counted. He could feel the frailty in her small frame, the unsteady rise and fall of her chest. Cold, too cold, but she was breathing. That was all that mattered. Bennett led the way, his flashlight swinging as he radioed for emergency services. Chris followed close behind, her voice calm but urgent. Noah scanned a path ahead, ready to clear any obstacles. The dog stayed silent, its ears flicking at every sound in the night. It hadn't left the girl's side since they found her, and even now it kept close, its eyes never straying from her, as if it knew its job wasn't done yet. When they reached the road, the sound of sirens cut through the stillness. Red and blue lights flickered against the trees as an ambulance pulled up, paramedics rushing toward them with a stretcher. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before gently lowering the girl onto it. Her fingers twitched slightly as the paramedics wrapped her in blankets, checking her vitals in hushed, focused tones. "She's alive," one of them confirmed. "Severely dehydrated, hypothermic, but her pulse is steady." Relief flooded Ethan so hard he nearly staggered back. He hadn't realized just how tightly he'd been holding his breath. "Do we know who she is?" another paramedic asked, glancing between them. Bennett shook his head. "No ID. She matches a missing child report from a few towns over, but we need to confirm." Chris pulled out her phone, scrolling through a local alert issued 2 days ago. "Emily Harper," she said. "Age 6. Reported missing from Silverbrook." Ethan's stomach turned. Silverbrook? That's over 50 miles from here. There was no way a 6-year-old had gotten this far on her own. Someone had brought her here, and whoever left her in those woods had done so with the intent of never being found. The paramedics lifted Emily into the ambulance, securing her for transport. Sheriff Bennett turned to Ethan, his face lined with exhaustion, and something harder. "I need you at the station in an hour," Bennett said. "You found her. We need to go over everything while it's fresh." Ethan nodded. He would have agreed anyway, but there was something in the sheriff's tone that made his skin prickle. The ambulance door shut, and within seconds it was speeding toward the county hospital. Ethan watched it disappear into the night, then exhaled sharply. The dog sat at his feet, watching him with those intelligent brown eyes. Ethan crouched down, running a hand over its scruffy fur. "You knew where she was, didn't you?" The dog let out a small huff, its tail thumping once against the pavement. Noah crossed his arms, shaking his head in disbelief. "Ethan, I think you just made yourself a new best friend." Ethan glanced down at the dog, still watching the ambulance lights fade in the distance. "Looks that way." An hour later, Ethan sat in the sheriff's office, a steaming cup of coffee untouched in front of him. The station buzzed with activity, officers making calls, logging reports, pulling surveillance footage. Emily's case had just gone from a missing person report to something much worse. Sheriff Bennett sat across from Ethan, fingers steepled. "Let's go over this again," he said. "The dog found you outside the diner?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, just showed up barking its head off. Wouldn't stop until we followed it." "And it led you straight to Emily?" "Not right away," Ethan admitted. "It took us through a long route, almost like it was trying to show us something else, too. But when we got to that tree," he swallowed, "it knew exactly where she was." Bennett leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "That's not normal behavior for a stray." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not." Chris knocked on the open door, stepping inside with a folder in hand. "We just got confirmation from Silverbrook PD Emily Harper was reported missing 2 days ago. Parents said she was playing in the front yard and disappeared within minutes." Ethan tensed. A kidnapping. Bennett flipped through the reports. "Looks that way. No ransom demands, no leads. Then she turns up 50 miles away in our backyard, alone." "Except for the dog," Ethan added. Chris sighed, crossing her arms. Silverbrook PD sent over something else, too. They ran the dog's description through their records. Ethan frowned. Why? Chris's expression darkened. Because Emily's family had a dog. She pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk. A golden mutt, the same one sitting at Ethan's feet, stared back at them. Ethan's pulse quickened. "You're telling me this dog is hers?" Bennett exhaled slowly. "Looks like it." Ethan looked down at the dog, now curled up beside his chair, resting its head on its paws. It hadn't just found Emily. It had stayed with her, protected her for 2 whole days. It had refused to leave her side. Something cold settled in Ethan's gut. If the dog had been with Emily this whole time, that meant whoever took her had left her out there to die. "Whoever did this," Ethan murmured, gritting his teeth, "they never planned on bringing her back." Bennett's jaw tightened. "And now we have to figure out who they are before they try again." Ethan clenched his fists. This wasn't just some random kidnapper. They had taken Emily, driven her 50 miles out of town, and abandoned her deep in the forest with nothing but a thin coat and her loyal dog. They had expected her to never be found, but they had underestimated one thing. This dog wasn't going to let that happen. Ethan reached down, ruffling the golden fur. "You saved her," he murmured. The dog lifted its head, ears twitching. Ethan didn't know how, but he could feel the truth in his own words. Emily Harper had been left to die. But this dog, her dog, had refused to let that happen. It had fought for her, stayed with her, led help to her when she couldn't cry out for it herself. And now Ethan was going to make sure it got the chance to stay with her. Because this wasn't just any stray. This was a hero. The exhaustion of the night before still clung to Ethan, but his mind wouldn't rest. Who had taken Emily? Why had they left her in the woods? And if they had planned for her to disappear, why not make sure she was gone for good? The dog suddenly lifted its head, ears perking up. A second later, Ethan heard a car pulling into his driveway. He stood as Sheriff Bennett stepped out of his cruiser, his expression unreadable. "Got something?" Ethan asked. Bennett nodded, stepping onto the porch. "Emily woke up an hour ago. She's weak, but the doctors say she's going to be okay." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Did she say anything?" Bennett hesitated, and Ethan's stomach twisted. "She remembers bits and pieces," the sheriff admitted. "She says a man took her, someone she didn't recognize. He told her he was taking her home, but she knew he was lying." Ethan clenched his jaw. "And then?" Bennett sighed. "She remembers being in a car for a long time. Then she woke up in the woods. She was scared, but her dog was with her." He glanced down at the golden mutt. "She said the dog wouldn't leave her. When she was too tired to move, it curled up next to her to keep her warm. She said it barked at the trees all night, like it was waiting for someone to find them." Ethan swallowed hard. "And the guy, the one who took her?" "Nothing clear," Bennett admitted. "She said she never saw his face. He kept telling her to be quiet, and then she doesn't remember much after that." Ethan clenched his fists. It wasn't enough. They still had nothing to go on. Whoever had done this was still out there. Bennett watched him for a moment. "Listen, Ethan, there's something else. Silverbrook PD checked into Emily's family." Ethan frowned. "What about them?" Bennett's face darkened. "They've been under investigation for months. Child neglect. Possible abuse. It was never enough to remove Emily from the home, but CPS had been monitoring the situation. Then suddenly, She disappears. Ethan's blood ran cold. You think her own parents had something to do with this? Bennett hesitated. I don't know yet, but we can't rule 'em out. Ethan exhaled sharply. This was worse than he thought. If Emily had been taken as part of some cover-up, or worse, as part of a deliberate attempt to get rid of her, then whoever was behind it wasn't just some random kidnapper. It was someone who wanted her gone. The dog let out a low whine, and Ethan knelt down, scratching behind its ears. You saved her, he murmured, and I'm not letting anything happen to her now. Bennett nodded. Silverbrook PD is questioning the parents. I'll keep you updated. He glanced at the dog. What are you going to do with him? Ethan looked at the mutt, then back at Bennett. Keep him here, at least until Emily is safe. Bennett smirked slightly. Didn't take you for a dog person. Ethan shrugged. Neither did I. Bennett clapped him on the shoulder. Get some rest, Ethan. This isn't over. As the sheriff drove away, Ethan looked down at the dog. It was watching him, as if waiting for an answer to a question it hadn't asked. Guess you're sticking with me for a while, Ethan said. The dog wagged its tail, but even as he said it, Ethan knew he wouldn't let this go. Someone had tried to get rid of Emily, and until he found out who, neither of them were safe. Bennett mused. That's a lead. Ethan nodded. She said he smelled bad. Maybe someone transient or who works around chemicals. Bennett rubbed his chin. We'll start running background checks. But Ethan, this is getting dangerous. Ethan knew it was, but he couldn't walk away now. Emily wasn't the only one who needed protecting. So did her dog, and Ethan wasn't about to let either of them down. He had barely stepped out of the sheriff's office when his phone buzzed. A message from Noah. Got something. Meet me at the diner. 5 minutes later, Ethan walked into the old diner on Main Street. The scent of coffee and bacon filled the air. Noah was already in a booth at the back, a half-eaten plate of eggs in front of him, and his laptop open. His face was tight with focus as he typed rapidly, stopping only when Ethan slid into the seat across from him. What do you have? Ethan asked. Noah turned the laptop around. I started digging into people Emily's parents were connected to. They weren't exactly model citizens, but one name stood out. Ethan leaned in, scanning the screen. The name Frank Delaney was highlighted, accompanied by a mugshot of a gaunt-faced man with deep-set eyes and scraggly facial hair. Who is he? Ethan asked. Noah tapped the screen. Delaney used to be a handyman in Silverbrook, did odd jobs, fixed cars, even worked as a cleaner at one point. But get this, he was arrested 3 years ago for child endangerment. A little boy nearly drowned at a property he was working on. The case didn't stick, but CPS flagged him as a risk. Ethan already knew what was coming. He knew Emily's parents. Noah nodded. Yeah, and the last time he was spotted, right before Emily went missing. Ethan's pulse quickened. Where is he now? Noah pulled up another file. No fixed address. He drifts between cheap motels and friends' couches, but he's got an old truck, dark green, beat up, sheriff's office, should put out a BOLO. Ethan grabbed his phone. They need to move on this now. He called Bennett and relayed everything. The sheriff listened, then swore under his breath. I'll put out an alert and get a couple of guys searching. If Delaney is involved, he's not going to slip away. Ethan hung up, his jaw tightening. I want to find him first. Noah raised an eyebrow. And do what? You're not a cop. Ethan exhaled sharply. I know, but Emily deserves justice. And if this guy is the one who left her out there, I want to look him in the eye when they put him away." Noah nodded slowly. "Then we better figure out where he's hiding." They spent the next hour calling old contacts, checking social media, and scanning through security cam footage Noah had access to. Finally, they got a hit. Delaney had been spotted at an old gas station just outside of town 2 days ago. Ethan and Noah wasted no time. They climbed into Ethan's truck and headed toward the outskirts of Silverbrook. As they neared the gas station, Ethan spotted a row of abandoned trailers behind it, rusted and forgotten. Noah pointed. That's the kind of place a guy like Delaney would hide out. Ethan pulled into the lot and cut the engine. They approached cautiously, scanning the area. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made Ethan's instincts hum with warning. Then a sound, a low, gruff cough, came from one of the trailers. Ethan exchanged a glance with Noah. "He's here." Before they could act, Rusty leaped out of the truck's open window and took off toward the trailer, barking furiously. "Rusty, wait!" Ethan started, but it was too late. The trailer door burst open, and Frank Delaney stumbled out, startled by the noise. He locked eyes with Ethan, then turned to bolt. Ethan reacted on instinct. He sprinted after him, feet pounding against the dirt. Delaney was fast, but Ethan was faster. He lunged, grabbing the man's arm and slamming him into the side of a truck parked nearby. Delaney struggled, throwing an elbow into Ethan's ribs, but Ethan didn't let go. "You took her," he growled. "You left her out there to die." Delaney's eyes widened. "I didn't. I was just following orders." Ethan's grip tightened. "Whose orders?" Before Delaney could answer, sirens blared in the distance. Sheriff Bennett's cruiser pulled up fast, tires kicking up dust. Officers rushed forward, weapons drawn. "Step back, Ethan," Bennett barked. Ethan let go, and 2 deputies immediately hauled Delaney to the ground, cuffing him. He struggled, but it was no use. "You're done," Bennett told him, "and you're going to tell us exactly who put you up to this." Delaney hesitated, then sneered. "You think I'm the big fish? You're looking in the wrong place." Ethan stepped closer. "Then tell us where to look." Delaney glanced at Rusty, who was growling beside Ethan. The man's sneer faltered. He looked away. "You'll figure it out soon enough." Bennett signaled for the deputies to haul Delaney into the cruiser. "We'll get it out of him," he assured Ethan. "One way or another." Ethan watched as the car disappeared down the road, his fists unclenching slowly. He had wanted answers, but now he had even more questions. Delaney wasn't the mastermind behind this. Someone else was, and they weren't finished yet. Rusty sat beside him, tail still and ears perked, eyes locked on the dust cloud left behind by the departing sheriff's deputies. The dog was tense, as if he too could sense that this wasn't over. Noah let out a slow breath, resting his hands on his hips. Well, that was something. Ethan turned, rubbing his sore ribs where Delaney had elbowed him. "You think?" Noah's lips pressed into a thin line. He was scared, Ethan. That wasn't a guy who just got caught doing something stupid. He was protecting someone. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Yeah, and I don't like that he thinks we'll figure it out soon enough." Noah crossed his arms. Could be a bluff, could be a threat. Neither of them spoke for a moment, the weight of the encounter settling in. Ethan glanced down at Rusty, who was still watching the road where Delaney had been taken away. The dog had known something was wrong. He'd acted before Ethan or Noah could, as if his instincts had kicked in long before theirs. Ethan crouched down, running a hand through the golden fur. "What do you know, boy?" Rusty huffed softly, leaning into his touch. Noah sighed. "You're keeping that dog, aren't you?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and dusted off his jeans. "We need to get moving," Ethan said, his voice low. "If Delaney wasn't working alone, we need to figure out who else is involved." Noah nodded, but his eyes flicked back toward the now empty road. "You think Bennett will get anything out of him?" Ethan shook his head. "Not easily." They climbed into Ethan's truck, Rusty jumping into the passenger seat as if he belonged there. Ethan didn't bother stopping him. As they pulled away from the abandoned lot, Ethan's mind raced. Delaney had given them nothing but an ominous warning, but that was enough to put Ethan on edge. The next stop was the sheriff's station. When they arrived, Bennett was in his office, his expression darker than before. He waved Ethan and Noah inside and shut the door. Bennett leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "Delaney isn't talking." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Not surprised." The sheriff sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We ran his truck. Guess what we found in the back?" Ethan's stomach turned. "Emily's belongings?" Bennett nodded. A blanket, a stuffed rabbit, both were in rough shape, but they were hers. He hesitated, then added, "There were also chains." Noah swore under his breath. So he wasn't just dropping her off in the woods. Bennett shook his head. No, that was Plan B. Ethan swallowed hard. "Meaning?" Bennett's expression hardened. "Meaning she was supposed to be dead." Silence filled the office. Ethan clenched his fists, his breath coming sharp and fast. He had known deep down that whoever had taken Emily hadn't just been planning to abandon her, but hearing it out loud made it real. Bennett pushed off his desk. "Here's the part that should really scare you. We found receipts in Delaney's truck, gas station purchases, fast food, motel stays. He wasn't working alone, Ethan. Someone else was paying his way." Ethan's blood ran cold. "And they're still out there?" Bennett nodded grimly. "We don't know who yet." Noah exhaled sharply. "If Delaney won't talk, what do we do?" Bennett hesitated before speaking. "We dig. We pull every record, every call, every transaction. Someone was funding him, and we're going to find out who." Ethan nodded. "And in the meantime," Bennett's gaze locked onto his, "you stay close to that dog." Ethan frowned. "Rusty?" Bennett nodded. "That dog isn't just some mutt, Ethan. He knew where Emily was. He led you straight to her. Now, I don't know what kind of instincts he's running on, but if Delaney wasn't working alone, there's a chance they'll come looking for loose ends." Ethan's pulse quickened. "You think Emily is still in danger?" Bennett's expression was grim. "I think, until we figure out who's behind this, everyone involved in saving her is a target." Ethan felt Rusty press against his leg, his warm body grounding him for a moment. Noah sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, that's reassuring." Bennett exhaled. "We'll keep her under watch at the hospital. But, Ethan, be careful. If Delaney was a middleman, that means someone bigger is calling the shots." Ethan nodded, already knowing that sleep wasn't in his future tonight. "Yeah, I got it." Bennett studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Ethan, if something feels off, if you see anything, call me." The sheriff nodded, though he didn't look convinced. Ethan turned, walking out of the office with Rusty at his side. Noah followed him, silent until they stepped out into the night air. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" Noah asked. Ethan didn't look at him. "No." Noah let out a dry chuckle. "Didn't think so." Ethan opened his truck door but paused before climbing in. He glanced down at Rusty, who was still alert, watching the world with careful eyes. Ethan crouched down, meeting Rusty's gaze. "You led me to her once," he murmured. "Think you can help me find out who's behind this?" Rusty didn't move for a second. Then, slowly, his tail wagged. Ethan took that as a yes. "I don't trust waiting," Ethan said, his voice low. Bennett's eyes narrowed. "What are you thinking?" Ethan met his gaze. "I'm thinking I want to talk to him myself." Bennett exhaled. "Ethan, just to see his reaction," Ethan interrupted. "If he's behind this, he's going to slip up eventually, and I want to be there when he does." Bennett hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but you keep it legal. No breaking and entering, no threats." Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Noah. "You coming?" Noah shook his head. "I'll stay here and dig more on this guy. If he's as dirty as we think, there's got to be something we can use." Ethan nodded. "Let me know what you find." Bennett walked him out. "Ethan, be careful. If Kane is half as dangerous as we think, you don't want to push him too far." Ethan opened his truck door, Rusty jumping in first. "I'll be careful," he said. But as he pulled out of the station and onto the road, he knew that was a promise he might not be able to keep. Ethan parked his truck outside the sleek office building in Silverbrook. The contrast between the polished glass windows and the weight of what he knew about Victor Kane made his stomach churn. Kane wasn't just some shady businessman. He was someone who had used a 6-year-old girl as a pawn, and that made Ethan want answers. Rusty sat in the passenger seat, ears alert, watching Ethan as if he sensed his unease. Ethan ran a hand over the dog's head, taking a slow breath. "Stay here, buddy. I won't be long." He stepped out, adjusted his jacket, and walked inside. The receptionist barely looked up from her screen. "Do you have an appointment?" Ethan forced a smile. "Just need a quick word with Mr. Kane. Won't take long." She sighed, looking unimpressed. "He's not in, and even if he were, he doesn't take walk-ins." Ethan tilted his head. "Not in?" The receptionist gave him an annoyed glance before pointing at a framed newspaper on the wall featuring Kane at a fundraiser. "Mr. Kane is hosting an event tonight. That's where he is." Ethan took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Where's the event?" She scoffed. "Not for the public." Ethan gave her a long look. "Thanks for your help." She didn't respond as he turned and walked back outside. He climbed into the truck, pulling out his phone to call Noah. Noah answered on the second ring. "You get anything?" "Yeah. Kane is at some kind of fundraiser tonight." There was a pause. Then, "That lines up." "I found something." Ethan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "Go on." Noah exhaled. "Kane's development company has been bleeding money for years. He's deep in debt. And you know who his biggest investor is?" Ethan had a sinking feeling. "Who?" "Emily's father?" Ethan's breath caught. "Wait, what?" "Yeah. Looks like Emily's dad put everything into Kane's projects. And when things started going south, he tried to pull out. But here's the kicker. 2 weeks before Emily went missing, her dad suddenly withdrew his complaints. No more lawsuits, no more demands for repayment. Ethan's pulse quickened because Kane had leverage. Noah's voice was grim. "Looks that way." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Where's this fundraiser? Some private estate just outside town. High-profile guests. Security all over the place." Ethan glanced at Rusty, who was watching him patiently. "We need a way in." Noah sighed. I might have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Try me." An hour later, Ethan adjusted the cuff of his borrowed blazer, standing outside the event entrance. The grand estate loomed ahead, a display of wealth and power. Expensive cars lined the driveway, and security was tight. Noah had managed to get him on the guest list under a fake business alias. Ethan didn't ask how. As he stepped forward, the guards barely glanced at him. They were focused on more prominent guests, local officials, business leaders, even a senator. Ethan moved through the crowd, scanning the sea of suits for Kane. Then he spotted him. Victor Kane stood near the bar, laughing with a group of men, a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked completely at ease, like a man with nothing to fear. But Ethan knew better. He grabbed a drink from a passing waiter and casually approached, waiting for Kane to notice him. When their eyes met, recognition flickered across Kane's face, but only for a second. He masked it quickly, offering a polite smile. "Don't think we've met," Kane said smoothly. "Victor Kane," Ethan said, taking a sip of his drink. "Ethan Carter," Kane replied, tilting his head. "Ah, the man who found that poor little girl in the woods." Ethan kept his expression neutral. "That's me." Kane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Tragic. Really lucky you were there." Ethan took another sip. "Yeah, lucky." Kane's eyes flickered with something unreadable before he chuckled, turning back to his conversation. Dismissive. Ethan clenched his jaw. Kane wasn't going to slip up here, not in front of all these people. But Ethan wasn't leaving empty-handed. He moved through the party, listening, watching. Kane was well connected, and more than once Ethan caught whispers about backdoor deals, bribes, and land grabs. Nothing solid, but enough to confirm what he already suspected. Kane played dirty. Eventually, Ethan stepped out onto the patio, needing fresh air. His gut told him there was something more, something he wasn't seeing yet. Then he heard it. Two men standing just beyond the patio, speaking in hushed tones. "You sure Delaney didn't talk?" Ethan froze. A second voice, lower and rougher, replied, "Sheriff's got him locked up, but he's not dumb. He knows what happens if he opens his mouth." Ethan's heartbeat quickened. "The girl was supposed to disappear," the first man muttered. "That dog messed everything up, and now this Carter guy is poking around." Ethan's muscles tensed. They were talking about him. The second man growled, "Then maybe it's time we send a message." Ethan didn't wait. He turned and slipped back into the party, his pulse hammering. Kane wasn't just involved. He was still trying to cover his tracks, and now they knew Ethan was a problem. He pulled out his phone and texted Bennett, "We need to talk." Now, then he walked straight out of the party, heart pounding. He wasn't going to wait for them to make the first move. He was going to stop them first. Ethan drove fast, but kept his hand steady on the wheel. His mind raced through the conversation he had overheard. They weren't just trying to cover up what had happened to Emily. They were still actively trying to silence anyone who got too close. The headlights cut through the dark road as he headed toward the sheriff's station. Bennett needed to hear this. If Kane was willing to go after him, there was no telling what else he was capable of. Rusty sat in the passenger seat, unusually alert, his ears twitching at every sound. Ethan reached over and gave the dog a reassuring scratch behind the ears. "We're going to stop them, buddy." When he pulled into the lot, Ethan barely had time to put the truck in park before he was climbing out and striding toward the station. Bennett was waiting inside, leaning against his desk, arms crossed. Noah was there too, pacing. Ethan shut the door behind him. "We've got a problem." Bennett gave him a hard look. "Tell me." Ethan relayed everything. The fundraiser, the overheard conversation, the direct mention of him as a problem that needed to be handled. By the time he finished, Bennett's expression had darkened significantly. Noah muttered a curse. "They're getting desperate," Bennett said. "And desperate men make mistakes," Ethan added. "But this means we don't have time to wait any more." Bennett ran a hand over his face. "We need to bring Kane in." Ethan exhaled. "Do we have enough?" "Not yet," Bennett admitted. "But we will. I'm calling in favors. We're going to go through his financials, his property records, everything. If he's got skeletons, we'll find them." Noah shook his head. "Problem is, guys like Kane, they don't go down easy. If he thinks we're on to him, he'll make his next move fast." Ethan thought for a second. "What about Emily's parents?" Bennett sighed. Still being questioned, they aren't talking much. Ethan's gut twisted. "They're scared." "Probably." Bennett agreed. "But if they're hiding something, we need to break through it." Noah glanced at Ethan. "You think they'll talk to you?" Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure, but if Emily's parents were as tangled up in this as it seemed, they were running out of options. "I can try." Bennett stood. "Then do it. And Ethan, watch your back." The Harpers' temporary housing was a small rental on the edge of town, nothing more than a quiet place to keep them under protective custody while the investigation unfolded. Ethan knocked on the door, feeling Rusty press against his leg. The dog had insisted on coming with him, and Ethan hadn't argued. The door opened just a crack. Emily's mother, Claire, peered out. Her eyes were tired, red-rimmed, and filled with something Ethan could only describe as fear. "Mrs. Harper," Ethan said gently, "I need to talk to you and your husband." She hesitated, then opened the door wider. Inside, Emily's father, Greg, sat on the couch, looking just as worn down as his wife. He barely glanced at Ethan as he stepped in. Claire folded her arms, shifting uncomfortably. "We already told the police everything." Ethan nodded, sitting across from them. Rusty lay down at his feet, watching the couple carefully. "I believe you," Ethan said, "but I don't think you told them everything you know." Greg's eyes flickered toward him, then back to the floor. Claire swallowed hard. "We can't." "You can," Ethan interrupted, "and you have to. Because whoever did this, they're not done." Claire's hands trembled slightly. Greg exhaled, rubbing his face. "If we talk, we're dead." Ethan leaned forward. "Not if we stop them first." Silence hung between them. Then Claire sat down beside her husband, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kane didn't just take our money, he owned us." Ethan kept his expression neutral, but inside his pulse was hammering. "Explain." Greg cleared his throat. "I borrowed from him years ago. Small at first, but when I couldn't pay it back, he offered a deal. More money, but with strings." Claire's voice was tight. "We had no choice. Every time we tried to get out, he found a way to keep us in. And then a few months ago, Greg said he was done." Ethan frowned. "And that's when Emily went missing." Greg nodded, guilt written all over his face. "He didn't say it outright, but I knew. He took her to make sure we understood. He owned everything." Ethan's hands curled into fists. "Why didn't you tell the police this before?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Because if we did, we wouldn't just be putting ourselves at risk." "Emily, too." Ethan shook his head. "Emily's already at risk, and the longer we wait, the worse this gets." Greg swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Ethan glanced at Rusty, who was still watching the conversation intently. Then he looked back at Greg and Claire. You help us take him down." Greg exhaled shakily. "How?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "By telling me everything you know about Victor Kane's operation." Claire hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay." Ethan pulled out his phone and hit record. "Start from the beginning." Ethan listened as Greg and Claire laid it all out. Every deal, every threat, every moment they had tried to escape from Victor Kane's grip. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. Kane wasn't just a businessman using intimidation tactics. He had built an entire empire on fear, and anyone who got in his way disappeared. Claire wiped at her eyes. "When Emily went missing, we just knew it was him." Ethan's voice was steady. "Then why didn't you go straight to the police?" Greg clenched his jaw. "Because the last person who crossed Kane ended up in a ditch. He doesn't leave loose ends." Ethan exchanged a glance with Rusty, who was lying by his feet, ears twitching at the emotions in the room. He had heard enough. "We need to take this to Bennett," Ethan said. "Now." Greg hesitated. "Will that be enough?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "It's more than we had before." Claire sniffled. "And if it's not?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "Then we make sure it is." They arrived at the sheriff's station 30 minutes later, the weight of what was coming heavy on all of them. Bennett was waiting in his office, Noah standing beside him, arms crossed. The second Ethan walked in with the Harpers, Bennett's expression hardened. "Tell me you've got something," Bennett said. Ethan nodded. "They're ready to talk." Bennett sat back, motioning for them to sit, then start talking. Greg and Claire took turns recounting everything. How Kane had trapped them in a cycle of debt, how he had used threats to keep them in line, how he had made it clear that Emily was nothing more than leverage. Bennett's face darkened with every word. When they finished, Bennett exhaled slowly. This is enough to bring him in. Noah, who had been silent up until now, straightened. "Then let's do it." Bennett held up a hand. "It's not that simple. If we tip him off too soon, he'll run. Or worse." Ethan's gut twisted. "You think he'll try to finish what he started?" Bennett didn't answer right away. Then, "I think we need to move fast." Ethan nodded. "Then what's the plan?" Bennett stood. "We're going to get a warrant, but I don't trust him to just sit tight while we do it. We need to keep eyes on him." Ethan understood immediately. "I'll do it." Bennett gave him a long look. "Ethan, I'm already on his radar." Ethan interrupted. "He knows I'm a problem. Let me see what he does when he thinks no one's watching." Bennett sighed, but didn't argue. "Fine. But you keep your distance. I don't need you getting yourself killed before we bring this guy down." Ethan nodded. "Got it." As he turned to leave, Noah clapped him on the shoulder. "Try not to get shot." Ethan smirked. "I'll do my best." Ethan felt the tension in the air. "I know, buddy," he murmured to Rusty. Something's not right. The SUV eventually pulled into a secluded property, one of Kane's private holdings. Ethan parked down the road, watching through binoculars as Kane got out and disappeared inside. Lights flickered on, and shadows moved behind the curtains. Then movement. A second vehicle arrived, another SUV. 2 men got out, both armed. Ethan's pulse quickened. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't business as usual. He reached for his phone and called Bennett. "We've got a problem." Bennett's voice was sharp. "What kind of problem?" "Kane isn't just hiding," Ethan said. "He's meeting with people, armed people." Bennett swore under his breath. "Stay put. We're coming." Ethan hung up, but he couldn't shake the feeling in his gut. Something big was happening, and he wasn't sure they had time to wait. Rusty let out a quiet growl. Ethan reached down, running a hand over the dog's fur. "Yeah," he muttered, "I don't like it either." Then, without another word, he opened the truck door. He wasn't going to wait for Kane to make the next move. He was going to stop him first. Ethan kept low as he moved toward the tree line, keeping his eyes locked on the house. The SUVs sat in the driveway, their engines still warm. Whatever meeting was happening inside wasn't just a quick exchange. This was something planned, something bigger than he had anticipated. Rusty stayed close, his body low to the ground, silent as he moved beside Ethan. The dog had an uncanny way of knowing when to stay quiet, when to wait. Right now, Rusty was watching as intently as Ethan was, muscles tense and ready. Ethan pulled out his phone and checked the time. Bennett and his men would still need at least 10 minutes to get here. That was too long. If Kane was preparing to make a move, Ethan needed to know what it was now. He crouched behind a pile of stacked firewood near the side of the house, just close enough to hear the muffled voices inside. They were talking low and hurried. "Sheriff's on to us," one voice said. Ethan's grip tightened around the edge of the woodpile. He leaned in, holding his breath. "We move tonight," another voice said. "Before they lock this down." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Move? What move? Where?" A third voice, one he recognized immediately, spoke. "Kane, I don't care what it takes," Kane snapped. "This problem disappears by morning." Ethan inhaled sharply. He didn't need to hear more. He pulled back, turning to Rusty. "We have to—" A branch snapped behind him. Ethan spun, but before he could react, a rough hand grabbed his jacket and slammed him against the side of the house. The wind rushed out of his lungs as another man stepped forward, his face shadowed in the dim porch light. "Well, well," the man sneered. "Look who decided to eavesdrop." Ethan's mind raced. He needed to stall, just for a few minutes, just long enough for Bennett to get here. "I was just admiring the landscaping," Ethan said, forcing a smirk. The man's grip on his jacket tightened. "Funny, we were just talking about you." Behind them, Rusty let out a low, rumbling growl. The man's hand stiffened, but he didn't let go. From inside, the door burst open. Kane stepped out, his expression darkening when he saw Ethan pinned against the wall. "Of course it's you," Kane muttered. He nodded toward his men. "Take him inside." Ethan struggled, but there were too many hands dragging him forward. He caught Rusty's eyes just before the door shut. The dog still crouched in the shadows, watching, waiting. Inside the house was even colder than the air outside. Ethan was shoved into a chair in the center of a dimly lit living room. Kane paced in front of him, his movements calm, calculated. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Kane said. Ethan forced himself to relax in the chair, to look unconcerned. "What can I say? I like to see things through." Kane exhaled through his nose. "You've been a thorn in my side since the day you found that girl." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Emily. Her name is Emily." Kane waved a hand dismissively. "Doesn't matter. What matters is that you don't understand how things work. Some people win, some lose. And if you had just stayed out of this, you wouldn't be sitting here right now." Ethan smiled slightly. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing to you." Kane's eyes darkened. "You think you're clever, Carter? You think you won something, but you have no idea how deep this goes?" Ethan leaned forward. "Then why don't you enlighten me?" Before Kane could answer, there was a crash outside, a sharp bark, a shout. "Rusty!" Ethan didn't hesitate. He slammed his shoulder into the man closest to him, knocking him off balance. Kane shouted something, but Ethan wasn't listening. He ducked, grabbed a nearby lamp, and swung it into the face of the second man coming toward him. The room exploded into chaos. The front door burst open, and Rusty lunged through, teeth bared. One of Kane's men barely had time to react before the dog was on him, knocking him to the ground. Ethan didn't wait. He turned and drove his fist into Kane's jaw, sending the man stumbling backward. Then sirens. Bennett. Kane's face twisted in rage as the flashing lights filled the windows. He turned to run, but Ethan grabbed him, shoving him against the wall just as the front door burst open again, this time with deputies storming in. "Drop it!" Bennett's voice rang through the house, his gun aimed at the remaining men. Kane froze, his eyes darting between Ethan and Bennett. For the first time that night, Ethan saw something crack beneath that smug exterior. Fear. The men dropped their weapons. Deputies rushed in, securing them one by one. Bennett stepped forward, locking eyes with Kane. "Victor Kane, you're under arrest." Ethan let out a slow breath, stepping back as the handcuffs clicked around Kane's wrists. The fight was over. Rusty trotted up beside him, tail wagging. Ethan knelt down, ruffling the dog's fur. "Nice work, buddy." Rusty licked his hand, his job done. But Ethan knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over yet. Ethan pointed at the screen. "Bennett, look at this." Bennett stepped up beside him, frowning as he scanned the documents. His expression darkened. "This is bigger than just Kane. There are more people involved." Noah, who had just arrived, glanced over. "What are we looking at?" Ethan clenched his jaw. A network. Bennett muttered a curse. This wasn't just about Emily. Kane was just a piece of something larger. Ethan exhaled slowly. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still more work to do. Rusty sat beside him, eyes locked on Bennett as if waiting for the next move. Ethan patted the dog's head. "Guess we're not done yet, huh?" Bennett looked at the list of names on the screen and shook his head. "No, we're not." Ethan stepped back from the desk, his pulse pounding in his ears as he studied the documents in front of him. This wasn't just about Kane. The names on the screen suggested something much larger, a network that had been operating under the radar for years. It explained why Kane had been so confident, why he had thought he could act without consequence. He hadn't been working alone. Bennett let out a slow breath. "We've been looking at this all wrong. Kane isn't the mastermind. He's just another player in a much bigger game." Ethan nodded. "And if we don't figure out who's pulling the strings, this doesn't stop with him." Noah, flipping through some of the papers, frowned. "Some of these names, they're people in law enforcement, government, finance. If Kane was just a piece of this, we're dealing with something much deeper." Bennett's face darkened, "which means we can't trust everyone in the department." Ethan's gut tightened. "You think there's a leak?" Bennett nodded. "Has to be. Someone's been keeping this operation under wraps for years. If we move too fast, we could tip them off before we're ready." Ethan exhaled, glancing down at Rusty, who was sitting at his feet, still alert. "Then we need a plan." Bennett rubbed his temple. "First, we get Kane to talk. He might not be the one in charge, but he knows who is." Ethan watched as the deputies loaded Kane into the back of a cruiser. His hands were cuffed, his face set in a defiant scowl. But there was something else there, something closer to fear. The man had spent years controlling others through threats and money, but now he was the one who had something to lose. Bennett turned to one of his deputies. "I want him in isolation. No visitors, no phone calls. He doesn't talk to anyone until we've had our chance at him." The deputy nodded. "Understood, Sheriff." Ethan crossed his arms. "And what about the rest of his crew? They'll be processed, but Kane is the priority," Bennett said. "We need him to crack before whoever's behind this finds a way to clean up their mess." Noah frowned. "That means we're on a clock." Ethan nodded. "And we can't afford to waste any time." Bennett gestured toward the stack of evidence. "Noah, go through every document, every email. If there's a pattern, I want to know about it." Noah grabbed the files and headed toward his car. On it. Bennett looked at Ethan. "And you? Get some rest. You look like hell." Ethan smirked. "Thanks for the concern, but I'll sleep when this is over." Bennett sighed. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Just don't do anything stupid." Ethan didn't respond. He turned and walked toward his truck, Rusty trotting beside him. He opened the door, letting the dog jump into the passenger seat before climbing in himself. He sat for a moment, gripping the wheel, trying to piece together what came next. Kane had made one thing clear. There were more players in this game, and Ethan wasn't going to stop until he found out exactly who they were. Rusty let out a low huff. Settling in beside him, Ethan reached over and scratched the dog's head. "Yeah, buddy, looks like we still got work to do." He started the engine and pulled out onto the road, already thinking about his next move. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ethan pulled into his driveway just as the first streaks of morning light broke over the horizon. The night had been long, filled with questions that still had no answers, and the exhaustion was beginning to weigh on him, but there was no time for rest. Not yet. Rusty jumped out of the truck the moment Ethan opened the door, trotting ahead toward the porch. He had earned a quiet night, but Ethan had a feeling they weren't done just yet. His phone buzzed before he even reached the door. He checked the screen. "Bennett, we got 'em talking," Bennett said as soon as Ethan answered. "Kane gave us names." Ethan's stomach tightened. "How many?" "Enough to make sure this isn't just a local problem." Ethan exhaled. "I'll be right there." Rusty followed him back to the truck, ears twitching as if sensing the urgency. Ethan wasn't sure what he was about to walk into, but he had a feeling that whatever Kane had given them would change everything. The sheriff's office was a flurry of activity when Ethan arrived. Deputies moved quickly, phone calls were being made, and the evidence room was being packed with files and documents pulled straight from Kane's records. Bennett was in his office, leaning over his desk, a large folder open in front of him. "Tell me," Ethan said as he stepped inside. Bennett gestured toward the folder. Kane thought he was untouchable, but as soon as we put the pressure on, he folded. The people funding him. They aren't just businessmen. They're politicians, law enforcement, even federal agents. Ethan clenched his jaw, and Emily was just a bargaining chip. Bennett nodded. She was never the main target, just a message to her father that he had no way out. Ethan scanned the names in the folder. Some were familiar, local figures who had always seemed a little too powerful for their own good, but others were names that reached far beyond Silverbrook, people with influence in places Ethan never thought would intersect with something like this. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. Bennett sighed. "We bring in who we can. Some of these names, we'll have to pass them up the chain. But Kane isn't the only one who's nervous. I guarantee people are already covering their tracks." Ethan tapped a finger on the desk. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance." Bennett smirked. "I figured you'd say that." The door opened, and Noah stepped in. holding a flash drive. "You're going to want to see this." Bennett took it, plugged it into his computer, and pulled up the files. Video recordings, financial transactions, private messages. Noah had found something big. Ethan watched as the first video played. Kane sitting across from a man in a suit, discussing a deal that confirmed every suspicion they had. Land purchases, laundering money, using people as leverage. Emily's kidnapping had just been a small part of a much larger game. "This is it," Bennett muttered. "This is enough to take down more than just Kane." Ethan exhaled. "Then let's finish this." By the time the sun was fully up, arrest warrants were being issued. The sheriff's department moved quickly, knocking on doors, pulling people from their offices, ensuring that no one had time to run. News of the arrests spread fast, shaking the foundations of Silverbrook and beyond. But Ethan wasn't thinking about the politics of it all. He was thinking about Emily, safe in the hospital, recovering from something she should have never gone through. He was thinking about Rusty, the dog who had never given up on her, and he was thinking about the fact that, for the first time in days, he could finally breathe. That evening, Ethan found himself sitting outside, Rusty stretched out beside him. The town was quieter than usual, as if everyone was still trying to process what had happened. Bennett pulled up in his cruiser and stepped out, shaking his head. "Hell of a week." Ethan huffed a laugh. "That's one way to put it." Bennett crossed his arms. "Emily's parents are going into witness protection. Safer that way." Ethan nodded. "And Emily?" Bennett's expression softened. "She's going to be okay." Ethan looked down at Rusty, who wagged his tail lazily. "She'll want to see him before she leaves." Bennett smiled. "I think that can be arranged." Ethan leaned back, letting out a long breath. The fight was over. Kane and his network had fallen. Emily was safe. And yet Ethan knew this wasn't the kind of thing that just disappeared. But for now, for tonight, it was enough. Rusty nudged Ethan's hand, letting out a soft huff. Ethan scratched behind his ears. "We did good, buddy." The dog let out a content sigh, resting his head on Ethan's lap as the stars flickered to life above them. The night was peaceful for the first time in a long time. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, Ethan drove to the hospital, Rusty sitting proudly in the passenger seat. Emily had asked to see her dog before she left town, and Ethan wouldn't let her go without saying goodbye. When they arrived, Emily's parents were already packed, bags loaded into the back of an unmarked SUV. They looked relieved, but tired. The kind of exhaustion that would take a long time to fade. Emily was waiting in the hospital room, her small face lighting up, when Ethan walked in with Rusty. She sat up quickly, arms reaching. "Rusty!" The dog bounded forward, his tail wagging wildly as he pressed his nose against her face. Emily giggled, hugging him tightly. Ethan leaned against the wall, watching the reunion. Emily buried her fingers in Rusty's fur, whispering something to him that Ethan couldn't hear. But it didn't matter. Whatever she said, Rusty understood. He always had. Emily looked up at Ethan. "Is he coming with us?" Ethan hesitated. He had expected this question, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to answer. Rusty had saved Emily's life. He had been her protector, her constant, but in the past few days he had become something else to Ethan, too. Before he could respond, Emily smiled. "I think he should stay with you." Ethan blinked. "You sure?" Emily nodded. "He's your dog now." Rusty sat beside Ethan, pressing against his leg. Ethan reached down, running his fingers through the dog's fur. It felt right. Emily gave Rusty one last hug. Take care of him, okay?" Rusty let out a soft huff, as if he understood. Ethan met Emily's eyes and nodded. "I will." As Emily and her family drove away, Ethan stood in the parking lot, Rusty at his side. It wasn't the ending he had expected, but maybe it was the one that was meant to be. Ethan looked down at Rusty and smiled. "Guess it's just you and me now, buddy." Rusty wagged his tail. Ethan opened the truck door, and the dog hopped in without hesitation. Ethan climbed in after him, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road. They had a life ahead of them, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't looking back.